Stop deforestation, yeah, it's time for hemp. Whoa, an acre of hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rest. Well, right now, it's time for hemp.
Thank you for taking time for hemp. I'm your host, Casper Leitch. You are listening to Time for Hemp at timeforhemp.com. That's time-for-hemp.com. And you're also listening to us on iHeartRadio, Tumblr, SoundCloud, Facebook, YouTube, a lot of places. Anywhere there is sound found on the internet, we are around making sound. In the past, my broadcasting network has focused mostly on broadcasting through iHeartRadio, Tumblr, SoundCloud, and now we're going to be broadcasting through our social networks as well. So if you follow us on Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, you have some questions for us or some guests that you think might be of interest to us, please not only like and share us, but also leave comments underneath. And we'll see what we can do about following up on any guest suggestions. We're going to try out different programs over the next several weeks here on the social platforms. And we'll be giving samples of the type of programming that we have at time-for-hemp.com 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on our live stream. And you can find us on your smart devices and, of course, share us with your friends. Yeah, you'll be finding Judge James Gray here on the network, and you'll be finding Terry Joyce doing her show. You'll also be finding Wolf Siegel doing The Farm in the Sky. I'll be doing, of course, Time for Hemp. And we have lots of surprises, and yeah, each type of program that you like, if you hit the like button and share us with your friends, that will give us indication of the type of program that you want us to continue to produce, and we'll try to make it a point to produce that type of programming. Today on this segment, we're going to be doing Healthy Mondays with Lynn Mathre and Al Byrne.
Well, thanks, Casper, for having us on. So I'd love people to look for Patients Out of Time at www.medicalcannabis.com. And yeah, today we've got Paul Armentano on with us from Normal.
Thank you, Mary Lynn and Al and Casper, for having me on. And this year certainly started off with a bang already. This has been a banner year for marijuana law reform. As I'm sure anyone listening to the broadcast knows, there has been a media firestorm. While we're on this show today, tens of thousands of people will likely purchase marijuana. But in the state of Colorado, those transactions will be legal. They will take place in a regulated market, and the state of Colorado is going to get a percentage of the profits from those transactions. And that really is a brand new day.
Yeah, sure is.
Your help with us has been quite lengthy and quite intense in that I've not seen, frankly, a writer of technical cannabis science better than you. And I would like you at some point to tell the listeners how they can read some of your work. I'm sure you have that capacity, but let's just tell the folks right now about impairment. As Mary Lynn stated, right away, Reefer Madness has started, and what we want to do is put out information that is accurate and real, not scare tactics and stuff. So I think just to keep everybody calm down that might be having problems with this, how about going into your history of study on this issue and what you found out after looking at it all?
Well, I think this is an important issue we're going to have to talk about, because I really do think that we are sort of at the beginning of the end of prohibition as a legal policy. And as prohibition or criminalization of marijuana begins to morph into a regulatory system, there is going to be less focus on sort of the rhetoric surrounding marijuana is bad to this notion of, okay, how do we regulate marijuana in a civil society, and how do we address the idea that cannabis is in fact a temporarily mood-impairing or mind-altering substance? And just like we understand that we have alcohol that is legal, but we have to have regulations and rules regarding set and setting, who can use the substance, where they can use it, it's very likely that we as a society are going to confront many of those same issues and have to hash out very similar details and regulations regarding cannabis. And my concern as we approach this issue is that we don't have a public policy response regarding cannabis and potential impairment that is disproportionate to the behavioral effects of cannabis. And that's why I think it is important for us, particularly as reformers, to not deny that there can be impairment-related issues associated with cannabis, but to acknowledge that if we have a sound public policy to address those, it can't be a disproportionate public policy. Like, for instance, many of the what are known as zero tolerance per se policies we are seeing emerge in several states regarding risks surrounding marijuana in driving, or like the typical urinalysis drug testing policies that we see that are fairly common in the workplace that actually don't address the issue of present impairment, but literally are simply provide information on whether or not a person at some unspecified past point in time may have come in contact with cannabis. So that's why I think this is a very important conversation to have, because lawmakers and regulators are going to be the ones who begin tackling this regulatory issue, and they need to have sound information in order to come up with sound public policy.
I agree with you, Paul. I think that social policy is horrible in this country. It's been built on a foundation of no knowledge, and I'm worried, as you are, about proportionality, and I'm also worried about the foundation that these laws and regulations will be built on, in that all the states have laws on cannabis's use as medicine, if they have a law, that's been made up by cops and attorneys. And I can see already with the way some of these states are handling, we're not going to allow you to use cannabis or have cannabis in your system and drive a car and all that stuff. We're going down that same road built on ignorance. So it's what you do and what we say here, I think, is very important, because we've got to get law enforcement and attorneys out of the medical business. We somehow have to get medical doctors and nurses in charge of this issue. And right now, that's far from anywhere near reality.
And I think the one thing you said, Paul, just to begin with, that whole the zero tolerance, the idea that if you're positive for metabolites, cannabis metabolites in your urine, you're impaired, and it's not like a blood alcohol test, which, years and years of studies, there's something to it about impairment depending on the level, whereas what you got here with cannabis is, okay, you've used it sometime in the past. That's first issue to discuss.
Yeah, it's really difficult, because for many people, their point of reference when it comes to drug-induced impairment is alcohol. And cannabis does not manifest itself, its impairment or its pharmacokinetics, what happens to cannabis after it's ingested, is very different than what happens with alcohol. But because so many people, including policymakers, solely have alcohol as a reference, they seem to believe that they can take rules and regulations as they regards to alcohol and just apply them also to cannabis. And the reality is that really isn't the case at all. Just as we couldn't take the same rules and regulations for alcohol and apply them to, say, benzodiazepines, because they are a very different class of substances, marijuana or cannabis is its own substance. and it is very unique in the way it affects the individual, and it is very unique in the way that the body processes cannabis. It does it in a very different manner than alcohol, and many of the sort of rules and understandings that we have for alcohol do not necessarily apply to cannabis. And that's really the first point that we need to stress, that these are two very different substances and they behave very differently.
Then we got another problem. And that problem is the education of healthcare professionals in the United States, around the world for that matter. But for those that might be joining this show and haven't heard us talk on this issue for the last 6 months or so, there are 157 medical schools in the United States. We have knowledge of the endocannabinoid system for at least 20 years, and yet not one medical school in the United States teaches any course at all to anybody about cannabis use as medicine or the endocannabinoid system. And when you've got this complete lack of responsibility in the medical community, again, I'm with you. I just think the whole deal is headed the wrong way, and it's built upon it will be built upon the same ignorance that we're discussing. And I like your analogy that all these people have to judge on basically is use of alcohol, which is not the judgment call that we need.
No, you're right, Al. And you bring up a really good point about the medical community in this. Can you imagine if medical schools weren't teaching about, say, the opiate receptors? Even though we know that that is a receptor system that is far more localized than the endogenous cannabinoid system. One thing that always struck me, and it was something that came up at one of your conferences, I believe it was the last conference in Tucson. Mark Ware was speaking from Canada, and he was talking about a CME presentation that he and others had put on at some previous point in time, and they asked the audience, which was largely comprised of medical professionals, what kind of information they wanted to learn at this conference about cannabis. And there were about 6 or 7 different topics they could choose from. And much to my surprise, the topic that the least amount of medical professionals cared to learn about was mechanism of action. They wanted to learn about cannabis, but they weren't interested in learning about how cannabis interacted with the human body. I found that shocking. I would think that would be the number one thing physicians would want to know when they're talking to patients, when they're dealing with patients that are ingesting this substance. And I think that's where a lot of the lack of understanding comes from, because even the medical community, even those that are interested in learning about cannabis, don't seem particularly interested in learning about how cannabis interacts with the human body. And that's the fundamental question that we need to understand. And from our understanding of that question, we will then have sound scientific public policy.
How have you had any experience? I know you have with trying to teach some of these doctors about the mechanism of cannabis.
Yeah, it's shocking when you think about it. We have, from my understanding, a denser number or more endogenous cannabinoid receptors than we have any other type of receptor in our bodies. And that's because this system is a regulatory system. The purpose of this system is to maintain a level of physiological homeostasis, or a state of balance. So things like our mood and our appetite and our blood pressure and our response to pain and our immune response are all regulated by this system. So we're not talking about some ancillary, obscure physiological system here. We're talking about a system that is fundamental to maintaining proper human health. And for physicians who, as a profession, are in the business of monitoring individuals, their patients' good health, for them not to have this knowledge and not to be curious, not to want to learn more, I think is really doing the patient community a disservice. And as I told you and Mary Lynn off air, I have had the opportunity in recent months to go in and lecture to a number of different types of physicians and nurses at different very large HMOs within California. And their level of ignorance in regards to cannabis and how it interacts with their patients was truly astounding, particularly when one realizes that these are medical professionals in the state of California, where medical marijuana has been legal under state law since 1996. So we have almost 2 generations worth of patients who have been using this substance and theoretically should have been monitored by their primary care physician regarding their use of this substance, yet it is clear that most primary care physicians, even in this state, have so little understanding of cannabis that they don't even feel comfortable having the discussion with their patients because they recognize that their patients know more about cannabis than they do. But that's simply because they, as an institution, have been unwilling to learn about it.
Now, Paul, we need to go to the essence of this show, which is impairment. You've done the research. Let's stay with science and research here. If I use cannabis, am I impaired?
It depends what the activity is going to be. And typically when people try to measure cannabis and impairment, after a person uses cannabis, they will then try to run through a battery of different performance and cognitive tests. And what we tend to see, if you take all the data and do a meta-analysis of it, is that typically the period of what we would define as acute impairment takes place about 10 to 20 minutes after inhalation and lasts till about 30 to 40 minutes after inhalation. So what that means is during that about 20-minute window, subjects that consume cannabis, regardless of the performance task that is in front of them, it is most likely that they will make the most amount of errors completing those tasks in that 20 to 30-minute window. Then after about 60 minutes, we see that their error rate drops off significantly. In other words, they make far fewer errors during that period of time. And after about 2 to 3 hours, they tend to return to baseline, which means they tend to perform those tasks in the same manner that they did before they inhaled cannabis. And I think this is really one of the key points when we're talking about impairment in cannabis, is acknowledging that there can be some level of impairment, but it's a fairly narrow window of time that we're talking about. And I think this is really relevant when we're talking about the issue of cannabis and driving.
Paul, I really want to thank you again for your efforts over the years, and they have been efforts, to produce scholarly, well-researched, well-written journalism on this subject. And please tell the people how they can find some of that.
Sure. I would encourage people to go to the website of NORML, www.norml.org. We have a blog that is updated almost daily there. Much of my writings is available on that page.
Well, Paul, it's always wonderful to have you as a guest on the big broadcast. You bring so much to the table when you join us, and I know our audience truly benefits from the knowledge that you share. Share the website with your friends, and when you do, please make it a point to let everybody know how important it is to take time for hemp.
Take another look and spend some time for hemp. Don't cut trees for paper, 'cause it hurts the environment.
At Crop King Seeds, we sell the finest marijuana seeds in the world, including White Widow, Blueberry, Purple Kush, Haze Extreme, and so many more. Our seeds are available for direct order with speedy shipping. Crop King Seeds are also sold in over 100 locations worldwide.
Excuse me, I'm looking to buy some Crop King seeds.
Look no further, my friend.
Wow, they're here and in so many strains.
Buy your seeds now, in-store or online at CropKingSeeds.com.